This is the Danger Close podcast, Beyond the Books with me, Jack Carr. Welcome to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by SIG Sauer. My guest today is Dana Loesch. She is the author of Hands Off My Gun, Flyover Nation, and Grace Canceled. She is the number one nationally syndicated female talk show host. Well, I'll go ahead and say it, the world, not just the nation, in the world. And just a fantastic person. We always have a great time when we get together and talk. So without further ado, please welcome to the podcast, my friend, Dana Loesch. Dana Loesch, thank you so much for joining me on the Danger Close podcast. It is an honor to have you on.
Well, it's an honor to be on, Jack. Congrats on it. Congrats on all your success. And I love the title of your podcast. It's very hard to come up with a title for certain things, and you just nailed it. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to have, people are always asking more questions about the books or the background or what influenced you here or there or what gun or knife. Can you go to more detail? So this is the Danger Close side of that. We're getting a little closer. So it works on a few different levels. But speaking of success, all right, number one female radio talk show host in the country, and I'll say the world. Amazing.
Thank you for that.
Amazing. It's top 10 in all. Like, I hate when people throw those things on there, those little, kind of like female or this, and like you go down all these little rabbit holes, and then you can finally find the place where you're number one, like on Amazon, like in this category, and you keep going down, and it's like, what category is that? There's only one book in that category. That's why I'm number one there. For you are top 10 in the world.
Yeah. Well,
that's amazing.
Appreciate that. Thank you. My kids still think I'm a dork, but it counts for certain things, I guess. And then other things, it just doesn't change anything. We show up and broadcast out of my house and just do what I do. I have a very long commute down the hallway and, just no traffic.
Oh, that's amazing. So I guess we did talk about it a long time ago, but then when I was on the show last week, I assumed you were in another studio off-site just because of how professional everything looks on there.
Yeah, no. Actually, I give that credit to my husband for helping to get that all set up. He actually handmade my desk, and I have a sweet 4.5 foot wide gamer screen that I use for radio, and I pull all my stuff up. And I wish that I had a 4.5 foot wide screen for everything. It's amazing. You almost can't go back to your little laptop after that.
It's tough. You have a bigger screen here in this setup. So no, I love it. But so you just had some news. So you have a new deal going here for the coming years. What is that about?
Yeah. So I signed a new deal with Radio America, and those are the folks that distribute my radio program across the country. And we're in approaching it's around 200 markets now. And I have a lot of call letters that I'm horrible at memorizing. So I have a cheat sheet that I have to rely on. You could never remember it all, but it's fun. I'm very grateful that I get to do what I love. I love radio. I think even more than television. I mean, I like television, but there's something about radio because I love the theater of the mind. I love telling stories and talking to people. And, when you're doing television, it's especially when it's, just the hour program and you have your commercial breaks and it's very just buttoned up and very official, and you just have to look a certain way. And I love radio. I love podcasts too, but I just love the spoken word. You just get right to it. And so I'm very excited. So extending that deal, I've been in this 12 to 3 Central, 1 to 4 Eastern spot for about 7 years. I started radio in 2008, literally right before the election. It was the very end of October, days before the election. Crazy time to start radio. And I love this spot. I love this day part. I love being on in the afternoon because I just really enjoy it. And I feel like I'm just sitting down and talking with people and, kind of shooting the breeze. And it's fun. We enjoy it. And we've been doing incredibly well in this slot now for 7 years, and going to continue going on for many more years. So excited about that.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. I love you said theater of the mind. Like I want to write that down. I'm looking for my pen really quick because that's a great line. I love that. I'm going to steal that for a book and of course give you credit in the acknowledgement. So that's fantastic. I absolutely love that. And yeah, so how did you get so good at this? Because so now I have a tiny, tiny bit of experience going on TV and going into that studio. So to be on Tucker was my first time, I think, being on like that kind of a national type program. And I went in and I expected to see Tucker like I'm seeing you right now. So I can see your facial expressions, your body language, if you're nodding your head, should I go faster? Should I slow down? Should I keep talking? Is he trying to ask a question? And I got there and I'm staring into a large camera and there's no video monitor. I can't see anything. I can't see him. There's no body language. So now I understand when I get back and I'm watching on TV and I see kind of a little awkwardness kind of back and forth. And I realize it's because that person can't see the host. It can't read that body language. Yeah. So how did you get so good at it? It was very awkward for me because that was a surprise. So how did you get so good at doing this? Were you always just naturally good at making an argument, making a point, and presenting yourself and your point in a way that's logical and compelling? Like how did you get so good at this? Like it seems like we met each other a long time ago, and you were like good at it from the beginning. Like how did that come about?
I wasn't always. I have to say, I wasn't always. I've been doing it for a while, and I've been. I did a lot of video stuff for like PJ Media and other things even before then. But you're right, it is when a lot of people don't realize when you're doing these national hits, doesn't even matter the cable news network. I mean, most of the time you're staring into just this abyss of the camera and there's no monitor, and you just have like some camera guy that's there. He maybe cares that you're there or not, you don't know. And you have no cues to go off of. And that can be incredibly disconcerting. And I think that's where radio really helped, and doing video stuff and just staring into a camera really helped to do that, because you have to bring your own momentum. When you feel like it's just you there in the room and you're talking in it, you really have to bring the momentum to do that. And especially when there's a delay, because sometimes there will be anywhere from like a 2-second. I've had one time I swear there was like a 3-second delay on one hit, and it was the most awkward hit ever. It was horrible because of it. But it's tough. I mean, you go in prepared. And this is why TV is so incredibly different, as you know, because you have your sound bites, you know what you want to say, and you have to say it in a specific amount of time, and you got to be ready to go right out of the gate. So it's like you're anticipating what you're being asked, you know what the question is, and here's your prepackaged answer, unless it's kind of a debate format. And then that can be kind of tough. One of the things that I started doing when I began doing a lot of television was and especially when I was debating people, because if I was going to be on like just debating somebody on Fox or CNN or what have you, I wouldn't get to see the person. So I would look them up, and then I would just not watch them, but I would just listen to them, because everybody has, people have like physical tics that they do that kind of let you know where they're sort of going. You can kind of tell when someone wants to speak by just watching their physical cues. Well, they have verbal cues as well, and you can hear it in the inflection of their voice, and how forcefully they speak, or how quiet they get, or if it trails off. And so I started just really familiarizing myself with verbal cues and listening to not just what they were saying, but how they were saying it and how strong their voice was. And then also also acquainting myself with, what makes them upset? How do you push their buttons? What are the things that they pick up on? And then you can kind of feel and hear that tension in their voice. And so that way I didn't have to rely on any physical cues. And if I was debating someone, I knew how to push their buttons just simply by going off of what they sounded like. And so that might be psychotic, but it ended up being very helpful. Long story short, it ended up being helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the first time I was on, I was like, okay, I wrote down, I spent a whole day prepping and then writing these notes and then kind of prioritizing these things. And I wanted to like start here and I wanted to finish here with my big like knockout punch. And then I got in and I only got halfway through, barely halfway through. So I never got to my good thing at the end that I wanted to finish with. And then I came back, I'm like, okay, now I've learned my lesson. I know how this goes. Now you got to get your points in up front. You got to take that knockout punch and get it in up front just in case the time goes off or whatever. And then second one, I did the same thing. I still didn't get to my point. I shortened everything down and I was like, So now I really have to make a concerted effort to start with where I want to finish, I think.
Yes.
And now I get it. When people would say like, okay, that politician, they didn't answer the question. They didn't answer the question. Now I kind of get it, because if you're spending all this time, prepping, and there's something in you've talked maybe ahead of time, or your agent has, about what what the questions are going to be, or what the theme, I guess. I've never gotten the questions, but kind of the general theme. We want you to talk about this, riots or Second Amendment or whatever. It's been very broad. I've never gotten the actual questions, but you prep for that. And then you get there and it's not that, for whatever reason. You get a totally different question. And so I totally get that, hey, I really want to talk about this because it's timely as a politician, and I prepped for it. So I'm just going to answer with my prep. So I kind of get it once you invest that time into prepping for a show. So I'm more understanding now. Kind of like I'm more understanding when I find an error in a book. I'm like, oh yeah, my God. I get it now.
Then you're like, I understand that. I feel that person's pain right now. I know, I've been there. No, you realize, you learn really quick that when you're doing an interview, and especially these cable hits, that, okay, I'm going to tell you what I want you to know. I know you asked a question, but I'm going to tell you what I want you to know, and then this is it. And it is a ride. It's a wild roller coaster ride for sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then you get off, and so I like this, because if I mess up, I can go back and I can be like, oh, what I meant to say was this. I don't know if that came off quite right, and we can have the conversation. But when you have those 3 minutes on there and that's it, and the music's playing and it's crazy like that. If you mess up, you mess up. Like there's no going back to correct anything. No, so it's stressful.
Hard to get in depth with something like this format. You're not getting. I mean, when you go on cable news, that person they're up to 11. Here's their prepackaged. They're ready to rock. This is it. And then after 4 minutes, okay, we're done. That's it. That's the end of the discussion. And then they go off being normal person again. I mean, nobody walks around like, yes, and sitting up like ramrod straight. Nobody does. It's not it. This is much more realistic with how people talk to each other. And I think a lot of people, that's why, these long form discussions are so popular right now, because the cable news is sort of like the gladiator event. And then, this is where, people really you can hash things out and have deep dives and long discussions. So it's good.
Yeah. No, I think that's the same thing. Like with radio, it's the same thing, because that's why it is so popular, because people think they're that third person in the conversation. When you're on there and you're talking, well, I think I'm having that conversation. I think that we're here, but I'm, making dinner, or I'm, fixing something in the garage, or I'm driving in my car. But like I'm like you're talking, and then if you have somebody else on as a guest, I'm the third person in that conversation as I'm driving the kids to soccer or lacrosse or skiing or whatever it may be. So it's so much more personal than just looking at TV. For whatever reason, there's more people in the room, usually watching your wife or the kids and whatever else is there, and then that it's you just know growing up with TV that thousands of people are seeing this thing, millions in a lot of cases. So it's more intimate. I think that that's why people think that you have that relationship with your listeners, and it's so powerful, because they're that third person in the conversation, or that other person in the conversation, even though it's just you and your microphone and the crew around you. It's just something it's so powerful about that.
Yeah, it is, and to be able to take modern current events and weave stories around that and have those discussions. I mean, you have to really love to talk, for sure, and tell stories. Clearly, you enjoy telling stories, and I love talking. And sometimes I'll tell stories, but you really love telling stories. So, I mean, that's where it's in some ways, it's kind of a natural fit, I think, for writers, because it's just another medium. But you do think differently, and I'm sure that you've noticed this when you've been in front of a microphone. The thought process is so much different from the keyboard to the microphone. And that was a huge hurdle for me to get over when I first began radio, because I hated it with a burning passion of 1,000 suns, did not want to continue. But then as I got more into it, oh my gosh, I hated radio so bad. Yeah, you look surprised. I hated it.
Yeah.
It was baptism by fire. They literally threw me in a room and they're like, okay, go live. And I thought, you people must have a lot of money for attorneys, because you have no idea what I'm going to do on your live radio airwaves. And it ended up working out. But my first shows were horrible. They're some of the worst things that have ever been put on air, Jack. I swear to you, they're awful. And I was like you, I scripted out live radio. I scripted out my every hour of every broadcast. You can't do that. You have to, you have to be flexible, and you have to be able to flow. And thankfully, I've gotten a lot better, and I found my rhythm, so to speak. But Those early days were tough.
Do you ever go back and watch or listen to some of those early ones, or are they just things of the past?
Oh, I could never. I would cry to death. I don't even know if that's ever considered as a cause of casualty, but it would absolutely be in my case. Now, there's certain times I hate the sound of my own voice, and I can't stand watching myself on television. And so,
Really?
but if it's something that because you know if you've done something well or if you haven't. And when I know that I've screwed up or I could have done it in a better way, I will, as a punishment, force myself to watch it. And then I'll pick myself apart. I mean, you are your own worst critic. And there is nothing that anybody could ever say that would be harsher on me than I am on myself. And so I will tear apart like a segment of radio, or I will tear apart a cable hit and I will pause it and I will literally write notes like, this is awful. This is what, you should have said. And especially if it's about an issue that you really care about, if you're advocating for something or if you're defending something, you want to make sure that you have it down perfect. And so I will go back and rhetorically gut myself by watching it. And that's not fun. So I try to make that happen as minimal as possible, if ever.
Yeah, no, I do the same thing. I'm like, oh, I said too many ums there. Oh, I stumbled and I knew what I wanted to say, but I didn't quite get it. And do you remember when Demi Moore is walking across the grass when her character is introduced in A Few Good Men, and in her head she's like going over exactly what she wants to say and all her options to her boss, the commanding officer, or whoever it is that she's going to talk to, and she's talking and she's walking across the lawn and she sits down in the seat and she puts it all together and totally jacks it up.
Yeah,
like. That's what I feel like I did when I was on with Katie Pavlich's show the other day. And I had this thing that I wrote in the preface to my first novel where I say we are citizens, not subjects, and we must stay ever vigilant that we remain so. And I've read that so many times and I've said it so many times. And so I was going to incorporate that into what we were talking about because it was Second Amendment type stuff. Yeah. And I totally jacked it up. And as I'm saying it, I'm thinking of Demi Moore walking across the lawn and saying this thing in A Few Good Men. And I said, instead of remain, I said stay, or stay, I said remain. And I totally mixed it up. And at least I got the first part down. So it ended up being okay, but still, yeah.
These are the stories that I can go back to and
overthink it.
They're going to go, he is human after all. See, you have to
totally.
You have to have those stories for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of humanizes you, I think, to your audience as well. I think there's a place where you can get almost too smooth, and I'll never get there because I'm not as smooth in general. But I think that some of that authenticity piece that people, and there's, it's overused word, but there's not really a better word for it, that humanizes you to people when you do that. And so I think even that being real and authentic and having it come off as not so polished, there's actually power in that as well, especially in today's mediums.
Because don't you view people, and this might be mean for me to say, but don't you view people who are just too polished as being kind of shady? Like that guy, yes, too slick. That guy's too. Yeah, don't trust.
My wife does for sure. Like she'll see somebody on, we're watching the news. She's like, too smooth, like too slick. There's something about that person.
So if you're too good, it's like a personality flaw because that person. Nobody's that good naturally. I mean, that's like something that it's a skill set that you acquire. Nobody's that good naturally. So you're right. There is something as long as you have like a couple errors or you say some ums, you're good. I mean, then we all trust
it's okay.
We do.
What can you do in the end? Like, we're all doing the best we can. And of course, always we want to get better, of course, at everything we do. But, and so from the beginning was Second Amendment. And was that always from the beginning, from your first show, when you first stepped into the, I guess, the public sphere, was that always something that you were passionate about, that you were so good at articulating, like every time my wife and I see you on TV, we're like, yeah, Dana. And some of those ones that have been crazy tough, like those town hall, like when everyone is against you and you stand up, you're the only person there. My wife and I are like, yeah, I mean, we're just there. I know we want to support you as best as we can. And like, I'll text you and be like, yeah, you did such a great job. Thank you for standing strong for us, and all that. But were you always that good at it, or were you always passionate about it, or did it did you kind of get there over time? And were you just talking about topics in general as you started off, and then now you found this not a niche, but this passion for the Second Amendment?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And I have to thank you too, because you're such a great encourager. For people who don't know, Jack is like great at encouragement, as good as he is at writing. Oh. I didn't start off that way for sure. I mean, even though, because I was raised very not the ideology that I am today, by a family that's still very much that ideology. But, being from Southern Missouri and they hunt, so there's always that common ground. So it was never an issue of a contentious issue for me, I think, until I became an adult. And I sort of fell into it. I didn't want to go into broadcasting. I fought broadcasting tooth and nail. And then I finally, this is how it all started, honestly, was because of a Second Amendment column. I had a newspaper column in the daily paper, and it was this award-winning column. And, everything was kittens and sunshine. And I wrote about how I have firearms in my home, and I also have kids. And it was like I was talking about setting puppies and kittens on fire or something. I mean, just the way that people reacted. And it's always, the loudest people are the ones who are the mean, critical people who disagree with you. They're always so much louder than the people who agree with you. But that was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that, really. And they were very anti everything that I had just said in that column. And I wasn't talking about, irresponsible handling or anything like that. And it went from there and it became a news story because the paper's editorial board was like, we can't have content like this in our paper. And then the Alternative Weekly that hated the paper wanted to exploit it just because they wanted to kick the paper. And so it became an even bigger deal. And I ended up being a guest on a morning radio show. And after my hit, they asked if I wanted to come in and talk with them. And then they said, why don't you come in and start a radio program on Sunday? And I said, you guys are nuts. I'm not doing that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I'm like, I've never started broadcasting. I took like 5 seconds of a radio production class and I dropped it immediately and switched it to something else. So I fought it for a good 6 months and they would not stop. And I did a couple of other radio hits and I ended up doing it. And the Second Amendment it became more and more important because I'd always supported it, but not actively, I never really had any reason to go out and talk gun law and talk about, handling and correct people because it didn't seem, even then when I first began, it didn't even, after all the stuff with the newspaper, it didn't even seem that contentious. And I think it was when I actually had to go and get my concealed carry license because of need, not because just of something like, I was doing it leisurely. We had people that started even, then coming to the house when I started doing radio and the hate mail that you would get and everything else. And I had to walk to a dark parking lot at night after I would leave my radio show at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And I'd have to walk all the way across this empty dark parking lot to get to my car. I needed to train, and I had never, up until that point, ever carried a handgun in my ever loving life. I mean, I grew up on rifles and shotguns. That's just what country folk had. Country folk relied on that more than they did handguns. Nothing against pistols or anything, but and so I wanted to get very familiar with it as much as I could and learn everything about the law, and that's kind of what kickstarted it. And there were a couple of things that happened. I talked about this in my book in my youth and things that happened after I got started in politics that really flipped that switch for me to be passionate about the issue. And then after seeing people try to erode those rights or shame people who just simply want to live their lives and make sure they can protect their families, I think it comes from a place of me not wanting anyone else to ever feel the way that I did before I had to go and get my concealed carry and just feel vulnerable, right? You don't want to ever feel vulnerable, and you don't ever want to feel like you can't handle your own business. I'm a control freak. That feeling terrifies me more than anything else, is not being able to handle my own business. And so being made to feel that way, I didn't want anybody else to ever feel that way. They have a choice as to whether or not they want to or not. But I want to make sure that they have that choice. If they want to carry, if they don't want to carry, it doesn't matter. I just want to make sure that choice is always available for people. And so that's where my passion for it comes from. And it just throughout, I guess my career, it just kind of developed that way. It was never anything that I sought out. I never sought out anything. I never approached anyone. It just all kind of happened. And then, I go where the fight is, I guess. So, rhetorically speaking. So that's kind of how it all happened.
Yeah, well, I can't think of anyone better to be out in front of this issue. And just when I walked in here to do this, my wife is in there and she's like, yeah, Dana, she's like, go get them, and every time we see you on there, you're just, it's crazy. So I'm learning from you. I'm like, okay, how did she say that? Oh, that's amazing. So at some point along the line, also you wrote 3 books. And one is here, Flyover Nation. Grace Canceled was the latest one, which was last year. We moved, so I have multiple in boxes here, but that was the third one. And then the first one, Hands Off My Gun. So you found time to do 3 books over the last few years. And is there another one in the works, or is this something you'd like to do, or is it something that supports everything else going on? Because I know people want this from you, but is it something that you enjoy doing?
It's funny because I hate writing books.
I know, I've heard you say that before, like the editing process and all the rest of it.
I think it's the editing process, and everybody has a writing style, and that's why I was asking you when you were on my program about your writing style, because I'm always fascinated by how other writers approach things. And you're dealing with fiction, and you've created this entire world, which is amazing, and a great character development. And there's so much that you put into that. And I'm just writing about stuff that already exists, that's already out here, not making up a world. But it comes back to being harsh on myself throughout the whole process. And I constantly second guess everything I put in it. The first book, Hands Off My Gun, was just basically a breakdown of the history of gun control and looking at firearm law and statistics, and really putting human faces on some of these stories that I don't think that people are telling. Like, for instance, Otis McDonald in Chicago. This guy's name, he should be a household name. He fought the city of Chicago so that people could carry firearms and be able to defend themselves in their own communities. And he was tired of seeing people getting targeted in his community. And he, was an elderly gentleman, and he's, a natural rights hero. And it's sad to me that his name isn't as widely known as it should be. He's since passed, but his story and what he went through in order to get this victory is historic. And there's so many instances like this, so many people across the country that really humanize this. And that's one of the things we do in politics. We make a person a political issue so we can justify dehumanizing them. And that's why everything is so awful. And that's why we can never accomplish anything or ever find consensus, and everything's viewed as betrayal, and agreement is viewed as such. And so I wanted to remind people that was one of the perspectives I had going into this. I wanted to make sure that, these are real people we're talking about. These are people who experience things. And from these experiences, be they positive or traumatic, there were cases and law that ended up developing from what these people endured. And it was important to relate that. And in Flyover Nation, this was just, I was looking at the 2016 election, and there was something that was very weird that was happening. A huge section, I guess you could say, of working class, blue dog Democrats that felt like they didn't have a home politically. And everyone was talking about these inconsequential cosmetic issues that had nothing to do with healthcare premiums or paying your mortgage or your rent or your car payment or a doctor bill or anything else. And there were a lot of people who felt like they didn't have a home politically. And I watched them gravitate to someone that was ironically from New York, but didn't act like a guy from New York. No matter what people think of Trump, he didn't act like a guy from, in some ways he did, but in some ways he didn't. And people they were fed up, and they just wanted to talk about jobs and taxes and just get to the basics of stuff. And so I wrote about all of that, and I was looking at some of those huge cultural and political changes in Flyover Nation, and how it was sort of like Flyover Nation became the entire country, except for maybe some of the edges of the east and western coasts. And it was interesting to watch that. And then my last book, Grace Canceled, which came out the week before the lockdown, which was just awesome. In fact, when we were in New York for the first press week, and then after we came back, I had like 25 some odd events around the country that all these cities began shutting down, and I wasn't able to go out and talk to people about it. But I hated writing this book the most Because
Grace canceled?
Yes, because I needed to write it. Yeah, Grace canceled. I hated writing Grace canceled the most because it needed to be written. And I don't know if it was more for myself or for other people, but I think every now and then it's good in my industry to do a gut check and a spiritual check as to where you are and how you're treating people and how you're representing the issues that you say that you care so much about. And are you being a good representative of that? And are you being a good bearer of the platform that you have been given? Why or why not? And so that's kind of where this book came from. And it looked at cancel culture, but even more than cancel culture, the cancellation of grace and the cancellation of redemption and reconciliation and why everybody is so divided. So that's what Grace Canceled was about. And it was written at a very difficult period. And it was therapeutic and cathartic at the same time. And I didn't let myself off the hook at all. Like I didn't excuse myself, even though I wrote the book. I didn't excuse myself from it. So, but that's what that one was about.
Yeah, and that one was very timely. How long did that one take? Because, and it seems like things have only gotten worse since then. It doesn't seem like we're on a trend to that unreconciliation or understanding the nature and the power of forgiveness and working together. It seems like we have politicians intentionally dividing the country for their own political gain, and by political gain I mean power grabs. And so it seems like Grace Canceled was so timely, and it's timely right now, even more so because things have, it seems anyway, have just gotten worse, and people are just so mean and nasty online, and people see our elected representatives see opportunities to exploit horrible situations to divide us further so that they solidify a base and take more power for themselves. And so how long did it take you to write Grace Canceled? Because it was so timely when it came out, and it continues to be so timely today.
And that, well, I think it was kind of in fits and starts. So the very beginning of the book, I wrote the introduction in like one sitting, and I wrote a couple of chapters in one sitting. And then there were portions that I kept in and some things that started going, you go in and you edit. And I wanted it to be just very concise and very straight, no chaser. And ultimately, I think the editing process took the longest, but maybe just a few months to really write this book and go through it. And I mean, you know how it is. You try to write every single day, and you write even though it's awful, so that you can train your mind to engage in that practice every single day. It's very much disciplined and a discipline. But because so much of this was there were so many things that were happening in this book that were germane to the whole title of the book. So I was going back even during the editing process, like, oh, I have to add this in. I thought my editor was going to strangle me. God love him. And adding different stories in, while also trying to not drag it out for forever, because, they're like, look, there's only so much that people want to read of this one topic. I'm like, I get it, but there's so many examples of this. But it's weird because it was one of the quickest books to write, but the hardest book to edit, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, I remember talking to you when you were editing it, and you were like, and I'm like, oh, I love editing, and you're like, it's just crazy.
It's hard. It's like it's like having a child in a way. You're having a child, and then you're sending it out there, and then it's like you're being, and then you're judged on that creation, and so you're very sensitive about it. It's awful. Oh, it's awful.
Seriously, no, I've thought of that analogy before, but I never say it because I want have my wife be like, really. Really? So
it is. It very much is. It's in many ways, it's like having a kid. It's like, if your kid plays sports and they're not great at basketball, they're not great at football, you're looking around at the other parents like, oh, hope we didn't see it. Well,
and you're releasing something into the world. It's like out of the nest, like 18 and up you go, and here you are into the world, and good luck. And that's kind of, in that respect for sure, releasing that out there. But so in mine, and I talk about it and I think about it all the time because it's so much at the forefront. It seems like, the First Amendment used to be something that we could all gather around. Growing up, I remember, so I was born in the 70s, and so the 80s was really my formative years. And I remember growing up and my parents talking about Martin Luther King and talking about content of character. Like in the 80s, if you grew up in the 80s, like that was, Martin Luther King, and it was content of character, not color of skin and all that sort of thing. So that was and then the First Amendment was something that everybody, right, left, center, whatever. Like that was something as Americans that we could rally around. Second Amendment, even back then, it's contentious here and there. But the first, that was something that we will fight for your right to say it, especially if we disagree with you. And now we are seeing that the exact opposite of that. We're seeing opportunities for big tech and politicians to get us in what I call an L ambush. So in the military, you have an ambush here. It's an online ambush. And then you have an L ambush. So you're not like shooting at each other, but you have the enemy trapped in an L. And that's what I see this as, is big tech and politicians right here catching us all in this L ambush and promoting, canceling, promoting, even if private companies can do certain things and that's fine. But we used to act in the spirit of the First Amendment, even if they were private companies. Now, the exact opposite is true. We're seeing opportunity to subvert that First Amendment because we're private companies. And we have this political private industry cabal with big tech where they can get away with doing this and acting in a way that is not in concert with the First Amendment. So it's hard to see that as a parent and watching our kids have to deal with this growing up. But it seems like we're just becoming more and more divided. And so something I think about every day with kids and knowing that, hey, decisions we make today don't just affect us in the next election cycle, they affect our kids, our grandkids, their kids going forward. So when you think about First and Second Amendment and you think about the divisive nature that we're in as or period that we're in here as a country, what gives you hope? Is there anything that gives you hope for the future for our kids and grandkids? Because that's something I think about quite a bit.
Oddly enough, and you had some really great points in there, and I want to say that L ambush, that's a whole piece right there. You should write that piece. That is a great way to describe that. I've never heard it described that way, and that's fantastic. The thing that I think gives me hope is the cynicism of Gen Z, as odd as that sounds. Like I'm on the young. I think you and I are on the younger end of Gen X, and we're just going to skip millennials. God love them. We're going to pray for them. We're going to skip those millennials. But Gen Z, there's something about this generation that makes me smile. And maybe it's just my kids and all their friends, but they hate social media. They can't stand it. My youngest is like, I see these people every single day. Why do I want to talk to them, on my off periods? And it's funny to hear him talk about it like that. And my oldest is kind of the same way. He's like, it's, people they go out and make fools of themselves for likes, and everyone is so cynical about it. And it's not just my kids, all of their friends, they talk the exact same way. And I was looking at these surveys that were measuring how Gen Z approach different issues. Like, how do they approach family, and how do they approach, how do they look at their country? And the odd thing is that they seem to be, in some respects, they kind of mimic my grandparents in a way, like with how they view family and the family unit, because everybody's been looking for inclusion and identities where we all always used to get our identity from our family and our community and by what we did. And now it's just people just want to claim something and say, well, this is what I am. And without having that rooted into, in any of these other things that they've been historically rooted in. And so there's this thing with Gen Z where a couple of surveys that I've read, they were returning to that, returning to family. I saw this another story. The younger millennials don't want to live in the cities anymore. They want to go to small towns and actually be able to buy property and afford homes. And the pandemic is like really accelerating that. So there's something that's happening in American culture where I think it's ascending to this shriek where people are just done. They are just finished with oversensitivity. They're finished with everyone else assuming the absolute worst about the other person and their intentions and motives. And they just want to go back to a simpler way of living. And they view social media as intensifying all of the divisions, giving people you always hear the phrase liquid courage. Well, this is digital courage. You give people digital courage and they really want to talk a big game and say stuff that they could never cash with their backsides in the real world. And it's given people this inflated sense of, I think, not self-worth, but just perception of self. And so that gives me hope because I see some of the stuff that they say, their sense of humor gives me hope. Their rejection of just, coddling and everything else, just, I don't know, just gives me, and they like rock and roll. Like, so now there's this trend, according to my kids, where, and I forget what they called it. They love the like Miami Vice neon light art style. And there's a whole phrase that I can't even remember the name for, and they're going to light me up over this. And then my son was like, so have you heard of Darkwave? And I just wanted to go, I felt like Bane, like I was born in this. You're merely adopting it. And they're actually getting into good music. And my husband and I don't know how to deal with this because, they're the kids. So they've discovered all of this. We've never heard of this, Jack.
Right,
like we're dorks. We've never.
Yeah.
So that's given me hope, and the fact that we can still go out and have an impact and we have our voices. You bring up something so important with social media, and I go back and forth on where I stand on so much of that because I obviously, I'm a conservative, but I have very libertarian leanings where it concerns business and economics and all this stuff. And just, my thing is I just want to be left alone.
Yes.
But I also understand antitrust laws and I see the point that some have made when you talk about these platforms, social media platforms that want to enjoy the exemption from laws that, me as a media outlet, when I'm on radio, I got to abide by certain laws. And there's certain things that if I say something that's not right or not truthful or defamatory, that's not protected speech and I'm not protected from liability for that. And I just think if platforms, there's an argument to be made for platforms, not as it relates to like Section 230 without getting too much in the weeds, but everybody should have to follow the same set of rules, right? Because we live in a republic. And isn't that what gives our rules strength? And it gives our republic strength. We're all equal in front of the law and we're all equal under the law when we break it. And there shouldn't be exceptions like that. If there's going to be exceptions for one, then there should be exceptions for all. And then we got to talk about the strength of our republic. And we've gotten into some dangerous territory as it relates, I think, with some of the digital offerings out there. So definitely you bring up such a great point with that. And I know that everybody's been kind of, slogging that out and having that conversation publicly, but some moves are going to have to be made for sure.
Yeah, this next decade is going to be very pivotal as far as the freedoms that we've thus far enjoyed and that people have died for from the inception of this country up through today so that we could pursue whatever we want to in life. We can make these opportunities. We have equal access to these opportunities, whether we do or not take advantage of them based on the decisions that we make as we go along. But I love the digital courage. That's a fantastic one. I want to take that. I want to weave that into a novel. Digital courage, liquid courage. It's fantastic because it's so true. You would never say these things. My friend has a good thing. He says, if I wouldn't say it to a person I was stuck with in an elevator, I won't say it on Twitter or social media. So I think that's, so I tell my kids that. I pass that along to my kids. Like, if you're going to be stuck in an elevator that's stopped for some reason between floors for a few hours, then if you're not going to say it to that person in there, then don't say it on social media. Be kind. Try not to, don't ever miss an opportunity to make somebody's day. I try to, go through my day like that. And I try to pass that along to the kids as well. Because social media, there's an opportunity to be mean, I guess. And that's a hard thing to deal with.
And the internet never forgets. I mean, people are canceled for stuff that they've written as teenagers on social media. I mean, they lose jobs and that kind of goes into, you're never allowed a chance to prove your worth or prove that you've changed and be redeemed and have that reconciliation. It's only about destruction. So, I've told my kids too, which they're not on social media, thank heavens, and they hate it as Gen Z. But I'm glad I don't have to worry about that. But I do worry about some of these. I think people the internet doesn't forget, and it turned around to bite a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and also the selective quotes. Like, I understand now when people say that they were taken out of context on something, because I can see how that can easily happen, where you take that one sentence and then you throw it into your article that is written in a certain way, and then this one sentence supports it, but you just grabbed it from a book or a segment that was a couple thousand words long or whatever it might be. So I can see that. So I find myself to be much more forgiving these days now that I have a little bit of experience in this realm, just because I can see how it can happen and how you can have a concerted effort by multiple people, organizations, platforms, whatever it might be, to cancel you based on morphing what you said. And then we have the whole deep fake thing. That's a whole nother discussion. We can talk about that That is terrifying. That's a whole nother part.
And there's a story today where psychologists can plant memories.
Oh my God, it's so crazy.
So we're getting into
we're in some uncharted territory.
Stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. Definitely uncharted territory here. But my hope is that we can go back to something that unites us, which used to be our common history, our Constitution, our founding documents, our love of freedom, and standing up for that person that we disagree with. So I see things not going in that direction. I see people forgetting. I see schools not teaching certain things. I'm sure my kids have not read the Constitution, even though I gave each one of them the full thing. And I read the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. We do that as a family. So I try to put these little data points in for them. And we have leather-bound versions of all these founding documents. So they're not just online. It's not just online like if I wanted to search some random thing that comes into my head during the day. No, it's in a different place than that. It's they're here and we see them and they're in there. Right, we can see them from the kitchen right there. And so as the kids go through their day, they see that. Hey, why isn't this whatever I Googled today? That's not up there, but you know what is up there? Those founding documents. There's something about those that are a little bit different. Why did Dad give me that at his retirement ceremony? Why did he call me up and hand me a Bible, a leather-bound Constitution, an old compass, and a Winkler tomahawk? And I explained why I gave them all those things. So I'm trying to put those little things in their head. But I talked to people that were in Vietnam, and when they went to boot camp in late 50s, early 60s, mid 60s, they talked about the Constitution in boot camp. Now you don't do that. You don't talk about the Constitution anymore in boot camp. And I think that is by design. Like you have to take certain things out. Why would you take that one out? So all you do is say you swear to uphold and defend it. But wait a sec, for these previous 9 weeks where I was here running around folding clothes and making my bed and getting yelled at and doing push-ups, we never talked about this document. We never read it all the way through, but I just swore to uphold and defend it. That's kind of strange. So anyway, so I think about those things, and the same thing goes for our education system. Like, I don't think the kids read the whole thing in school. They take maybe selective parts here and there as part of, some sort of a history class or something, but it's not, it should be a course in and of itself. And it should be something that unites us and does not divide us. But we're at a place where everything is used to divide.
Yeah, I always say that, and there was, I read something to this effect, and I'm not even going to be able to remember to give it proper attribution, but there's the saying that you can't go to France and become French, and you can't go to Italy and become Italian. You can't go to Germany and become German, but you can come to the United States and you can be an American. And it's that animating spirit of liberty. That's what unifies people. It's not how they look or what they think or who they worship or how they worship. It's that desire to want to be free. Do you want to be free? Do you want to be unencumbered from big government and tyranny? Do you want to be able to live your life and enjoy the fruits of your labor and voluntarily steward to your fellow man? Because if so, then that is what unites us in this big giant brotherhood that is America. And that's really ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. That's the common ground. And we may not, and nobody shouldn't. I mean, my husband and I don't even agree with everything, with each other on every single thing. Nobody does. We're not the Borg. We're not hive mind people here. We all have our own, things that we like, our own opinions and everything else. But that doesn't mean, as Reagan said, my 80% friend is not my 20% enemy. And just because we may not agree with each other on everything, that doesn't mean that we're enemies on this point. I mean, we have so much more that unites us than doesn't. And I wish that was as promoted in media and everywhere else, even in Hollywood, as much as the division is. And so when I do see those examples and stories like that, I make sure to mention them or grab onto them. And that gives me hope too. Just another answer to that question you asked a little bit ago. That's hopeful because, you still see those examples. You still see stuff like that. So that's good. It's like that Willy Wonka when Charlie Bucket puts the everlasting gobstopper down because he's not taking it to Willy Wonka's competitor. And you have, and he turns around Gene Wilder, best Willy Wonka ever. And he says, so shines a good deed in a weary world. So that's how I feel whenever I see stories like that. I get the Willy Wonka feeling.
I love it. I can't think of a better way to end this than on a note of hope like that. So yeah. Dana, thank you so much. And I know everybody probably already knows where to find you, but where is the best place for people to find you? Where are you on the radio? We talked about your time slots, but where can people find you, listen in, engage, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Website.
Yeah, website's probably the best. That's like the catch-all. DanaLoesch.com, Loesch. And I have the link to my newsletter, Chapter and Verse, which I send out daily. I have all my radio prep that goes in that, and deep dives. Sometimes if there's a lot of breaking news, I send a bunch of stuff out. And that's on Substack, which thankfully they still support free speech and they don't allow people to get canceled. So yay. But radio 12 to 3 Central, 1 to 4 Eastern on stations across the country. People can stream it online. It's with the podcast. You can find us everywhere you can find sound, basically. I mean, Instagram, DLash on Twitter. I'm on Parler, Facebook. So but yeah, DanaLoesch.com is where everybody can go. And YouTube, where I have my interview with you up on YouTube.
Yes.
It's on my Facebook page.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing that, by the way.
That
was
gosh,
so much
of
fun
course.
to
And I
talk
need to have
you
you on again. We're gonna have you on again because there's so many issues that are just like right in your wheelhouse, and you would be so great to take apart. So.
Oh, awesome. We'll talk about the L ambush. We'll do that for
sure.
Yes. But, and I love your Substack articles. Like those are so fantastic. I just found out, I don't know how I didn't know about it before, but I think in the last month I found out about Substack and what they were doing over there. So I love your articles there. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I know your time is so valuable. I sincerely appreciate it.
I always have time to talk with my friend Jack Carr. So
yes. Awesome. I can't wait till we get on the range and go shooting together again soon.
Yes.
So thank you for all you do. Also for all of us out here. I mean, you speak for so many people and you're out there on the front lines fighting unafraid. Your example to all of us. So thank you so much for doing that. And from the bottom of my heart, sincerely appreciate it.
Mega likewise to you, my friend.
Welcome to the Gear Spotlight section of the Danger Close podcast. All right, today I'm going to talk about AK variants because as students of weaponcraft, it is important to be able to operate weapon systems other than an AR and a striker-fired pistol. So in this case, this is a Rifle Dynamics AK Thunder Ranch Edition. So if you get one of these or any AK, it is important to know how to operate it. So getting on the range at Thunder Ranch or with someone else who knows what they're doing with these things is extremely valuable. So in this case, I had a section in my next novel here, The Devil's Hand, that is AK specific. So of course, where did I start? Well, with books. And one of those first ones is The Gun by C.J. Chivers, former Marine. So, and this is not just a book about a history of the AK. This is really about a history of firearms in general. And it is absolutely fantastic. It's one of my most gifted books. And it is I go to this all the time for reference. So it's absolutely fantastic. If it's not in your library, it should be. You can find it on my website if you want to know a little bit more about it in the blog section of my website. And I do reading list selections every month. And this was on one of them. And it's going to be on the one for April because I used it as research for The Devil's Hand. And where else did I go after that? I went to my Vickers guides. So if you don't have Vickers guides or don't know what they are these are the two Kalashnikov and they come in these slip cases if you decide to do that. It's just an option, but I highly recommend it. You're going to want the slip cases to protect them. But they're coffee table books. And so I get a ton of information from these things. And as soon as my office is finished here, there's going to be a table right there. And they're all going to get lined up because I go to them so often as I'm writing the weapon-centric portions of my novels. So you can see the photos in here are amazing. James Rupley takes the photos. Larry Vickers does all the history. And they're just amazing. I can't say enough good things about these books. So these are the Kalashnikov one, volume 1, volume 2. There's a whole bunch of them. Like that's the one for SIG right there, SIG Sauer. And they actually Larry asked me to write about my experience with the P226. So if you followed me for a while, you know that I have a deep connection to the P226 and because I carried it downrange for all those deployments. So there's a whole bunch of different Vickers guides. Highly recommend them. And I think that's it. Thank you for tuning in to the Danger Close podcast, an Ironclad original presented by SIG Sauer. You can find Dana Loesch at DanaLoesch.com. That is Loesch. And from there, you can find her on her YouTube channel and on Twitter and on Instagram and all the social platforms. So be sure and visit her there. And if you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to leave a review, leave a comment, leave a rating, and we will be bringing you more of these each and every Wednesday. You can find me on the social channels at Jack Carr USA. And to go a little deeper behind the scenes, check out officialjackcarr.com. Thanks so much. Take care out there. Stay strong. Keep fighting.